Keep them short, succinct, and let's see what we can get out of it tonight.
Hi, I understand everything that's been said tonight. There is not one solution. We have to look at many solutions. And really, that bit of paper I've given Mr. Logan, and that is really what the Orange Council has done. We have, in lots of ways, sadly, a lot of bitumen and a lot of concrete in Tamworth, and we don't utilise it. And we ship a lot of water away as soon as it hits the bitumen, hits the road. For instance, I did a quick exercise that if you got 25 mils of water on Peel Street between Brisbane and Fitzroy Street, you would end up with 70,000 litres of water. That's in just 25 mils. It goes straight into the storm water. That's just one section, not all of Peel Street. I believe if we had some what are called retention basins or detention basins.
Discussion. It's taken a long time to get here, and as Tony Windsor said, at least we're starting. We'll carry on from there. And I think what has to be included in this, there has to be a very thorough and very transparent review of what went on during the drought and the handling of the releases and everything else that New South Wales Water did. Because I think there's still question marks about that. And I'm sure it can be improved.
Good. Got to hold the microphone the other way.
Sorry, was the last comment, I'm sure you agree.
Yeah, that's it.
Can be improved. The management can be improved.
Look, I'm sorry, but I don't necessarily agree with. My view is that I think that Water New South Wales, who operates Chaffey Dam, operated that dam in accordance with the rules as they stated in the water sharing plan. I think the rules should change, but I don't think anyone did anything illegal or anything wrong. I think they just applied the rules, and the rules need to change. That's right. And we already know, and I think we already know how the rules should change to prevent that happening again.
And that's where we're going tonight, is the fact that we need to revisit and start the conversation. That's what we're doing here, is saying we've raised the issue. We know the allocation of the water and the decisions that are made need to be reviewed in the water sharing plan, and that's where we need to put our focus on. We need to be lobbying government for that to happen. And that's what this process tonight's about. And so that's where it's starting to achieve that. And we're raising attention and awareness to the fact that there is disquiet about how it previously was managed. We need to change the rules.
I think I'll be right. Tony Gill, I'd just like to bring up something that perhaps we don't think about enough. We're a rural area, obviously livestock, chickens, all of that in the mix. And we do have the reuse farm that obviously when things become tight, in other words a drought, and we need to supplement our feeding, you know, that's to me something that we're not really thinking hard enough about. Just my view, that there's about 3 gigalitres per annum increase of water, and you know what that could grow and what that could contribute at a time when everybody's struggling for feed. And I'd just like to sort of throw that in as a counter type argument.
Well, I'm going to let Stuart answer some of these questions. Sorry, but Peter, that's right. I don't think that in 5 to 10 years' time we'll be using all that water on that farm. There are better ways to make use of that water, and I think some form of indirect or direct potable reuse is inevitable, really. And that's the way the council has structured the last operating contract, is that we've held back we've got the rights to hold back some of the water that's being sent out there, so that if we do want to use it for some other purpose, we can do that. I think there's always going to be a need for something to put the surplus water out on, and that the reuse farm will stay in some form into the future. But yes, I don't think we're going to be sending all our water out there in 20 years' time.
Thanks, Graham. So, this is a question for Stuart. So, some of the places that you mentioned in your presentation that are, inland desert communities in America that have purified water recycling. So so the waste disposal issue that Bruce raised has been a real problem.
Yeah.
So evaporation basins seems to be a bit of a waste of water to me, that you're just evaporating water off. But is that what those communities do, or what other opportunities are there for dealing with waste?
Yeah, so it's been a big problem in the US as it has been here, and there are kind of two solutions. So a lot of there's lots of mining waste in the US that gets desalinated and reused, and so a lot of that sort of industrial salt actually gets put down old oil wells that have got deep well injection, and they get rid of it that way. But in terms of like the smaller plants, and especially when you're talking about drinking water supplies and potable reuse, the solution has been to not deal with the salt waste by using a different combination of treatment technologies, which are activated carbon and reverse osmosis. Sorry, activated carbon and ozonation. So they're treating the water to a high quality, but the one thing that they're not removing is the salt. And there are a couple of advantages of that. One is that they get more water out of it because they're not producing this brine that then gets lost to evaporation or whatever you do with it, so they get to use most of the water. But the other is you don't have the salt problem, and the only way that that's acceptable is if they're blending it with other sources in order to keep the salt level at a tolerable level. So there are a couple of big schemes. There's one, Gwinnett County in Georgia, that has a big scheme where they operate this way. They just avoid reverse osmosis because reverse osmosis is hard in inland environments.
Okay, my name's Martin. I think it's a good forum that we've got here, talking about the future of water, but I not want my photograph in the newspaper, please.
Oh, okay.
Thank you very much. The reason is because of where I work.
That's fine.
So I'm not going to say where that is. Some of you may know. But it's interesting that this issue of water security isn't something new. I'll just read this out to you. One of the first questions to be answered for a new or enlarged water supply is under consideration is the relation to the quantity which will be required when the work's completed and for a certain period into the future. Since the total quantity consumed is sure to increase in the future, the chief effort of an error of estimate will be to vary the date at which the enlargement of the capacity will be required, and even so, to secure the most economical construction, it is necessary that as close an estimate be made as possible. Now, this is what has been going on with the diagrams and the graphs and everything, and this is out of a book that I've got, and it's called Public Water Supply. First edition 1901, second edition 1908, and the one I've got is third edition, or improved. It's second edition revised and enlarged 1916. So this book's over 100 years old. They were discussing this issue 100 years ago, and a lot of people have sort of forgotten about that. But I think it's a good way forward. I think the recycle or the treatment plant that Bruce is talking about for a larger industrial complex, not just the violet farm, but the other ones and everything else, and having a councillor on it is a good idea.
Dams. You have
typical quality dams. You have the Barrow Dam, Dungown Dam, you have Chaffey Dam. You've only got one working. The rest of Dungown's it's not doing its job. You've closed Barrow, Gropoli Dam's the thing. Now you've got weirs. And I think all those weirs are sealed up. You've got a beautiful weir in Manila, but you can walk across without getting your ankle wet. You know, when I went there 50 years ago, you couldn't walk across it. And some silly body cut the cleaner off, and when the flood came, the water went over the top, the sill stayed at the bottom instead of going out underneath. To think that we've wasted from 1976 to now, arguing about the same thing. We argued about it in 66, 76, 95 right here in Tamworth. You had all these politicians, and they went away thinking that they'd solved the problem. What has happened since then? Absolutely nothing. And what amuses me is the people that are picking on poor old Spitlock Dam. Oh, how wonderful it was. It's 20 years since it's built. Do you know in Victoria that dams that haven't built for 37 years? And why is that? Because those dams that haven't built are being active dams working hard.
Oh, so
Spitlock was built as a backup to keep it. No environmental impact statements to keep
We
it
can
was
just
done.
close it down fully.
No business was
Because we're not
done.
using
It
it.
took 20 years to build because
Ah, but that's
$5.5 million, something like that, for 25 rows. They paid for that in no time, and they've been paying money back to the government.
That's my screen,
And
yeah.
they've pissed ever since.
Put that back.
Surely Dungown's been paying its way, and Keegan's more than paid its way, and we're 50 years behind.
I suppose it shows us we sometimes don't learn from the past. That we have the books, we have the information, that's the whole story. We need to be looking back and making some firm decisions about the future.
Yeah, Bruce, you stated that the treatment of the water at Waiata is a condition of consent for them to go ahead with the development of their new operation. You're pushing towards Tamworth Council, which is us ratepayers, now doing that. So is Waiata in any way contributing financially to the water treatment plant if Tamworth builds it, or are we as ratepayers taking on their costs?
So we're asking the government for the full 100% funding. If that's the case, then there will be no contribution from Tamworth towards the capital cost of construction, and Waiata and the other customers will buy the water off us at a market price, and that will cover the cost of operation, maintenance and renewal into the future. If the government doesn't give us, if they give us 100%, that's fantastic. If they give us less than that, then that'll be a matter for the council to decide whether they proceed with the project or not.
So Waiata won't be charged?
That may be an option for the council, but if we get 100% of the costs, they won't do. If they don't, then that'll be an option for the council to consider. But there's also other discharges that are going to benefit as well. So we need to have a look at who's going to benefit and how it would be an equitable way to apportion those costs if that came to happen.
What about the condition of consent for the expansion?
Sorry.
Wasn't it a requirement of their condition of approval for their expansion to have wastewater treatment?
Yes, so it's not, so it's a state significant development, so council wasn't the consent authority, the state is, but as a condition of consent, they have to build a treatment plant on site. So if this thing that the council proposing doesn't go ahead, Waiata has the option of going ahead and doing it themselves.
the steward here, which has enormous expertise about water. And Bruce is fantastic, and I like Bruce answering the questions, but we have this great source of knowledge here to tap into as well. As, yes, Gary.
Hello, I'm Raymond McLaren. I'm a lead engineer from Moonby, but I try to get a handle on the overall picture of things in the world around us. And what I'm seeing here tonight is complexity. We're seeing complexity in all sorts of things now, even in our water supplies. I think what Professor Khan said and Bruce Logan said, it emphasises the complexity of these things. And I think the work that the Tamworth Council, Bruce Logan here is doing is very impressive. I'm very impressed with what the planning is about these things in general. But looking in the longer and longer term things, I'm looking at a few things. The complexity of things starts with like the recycling of water. Recycling water, we're talking about recharging aquifers with recycled water. That's almost certainly, I think, include the problems. We're going to have double water supply, another complex system which is almost unthinkable if you're a water engineer. Each town has a different scheme. We have the reverse osmosis which we're looking at here in Tamworth, versus implementing. Long-term residue problems, hints at this, so what happens to all the salt eventually? For a few years it's okay. And then we hear about the work in the Lower Hunter, that they're going to build a desalination plant contributing some of the water from seawater desalination. So my question is, Professor Khan and Bruce, in the longer term, are we planning for a major desalination plant that can provide 25 megalitres per day to Tamworth, so we are relieved from having to do all this complex stuff?
So desalination plant is good for improving the quality of the water that you take, but you still need a source for it. There's no conceivable short-term or medium-term future where you'd be taking seawater and desalinating it and bringing it to Tamworth.
So Raymond, you're talking about a desal plant on the coast somewhere and pumping the water over to Tamworth?
Quality area.
Right. Okay.
And the desalination plant, based on distillation, produces potable water immediately, drinkable straight out of the plant.
Yeah.
And it runs at the town every day, 25 megalitres per day, all the time.
The problem is, even just to produce the water by desalination costs you about $1 per kilolitre. And then once you start talking about pumping at long distances and up over hills, then you can start multiplying that by factors of 10. So it means that, you know, I don't know what the drinking water rates are in Tamworth, they're probably about $3 a kilolitre.
No, they're not. $1.60.
Oh, okay, some of the cheapest. So you'd be meeting that price at the treatment plant in Port Macquarie long before you start pumping it. So if we're going to pump it, then you've got both the capital costs to recover on that pipeline from Port Macquarie to Tamworth, and you've got the operational costs. You're talking about hundreds of dollars.
It's a very expensive process. But in the longer term, say 15 years down the track, in 2009, we almost had a water cut-off in Tamworth. In 2019, the same thing happened. We were very, very close to running out of water. So, and from what Bruce mentioned, there is notes about the paleoclimatology. Other research I've done, paleoclimatology indicates that the last 200 years we've been here has been a wet period compared to the last 2 or 3,000. So this indicates what Bruce said, maybe there are severe droughts coming up, other parts of the world have had. But we can have a drought in the last 5 years, and in that case, you'd be planning for it. So I was looking at the longer term.
And that's what we're talking about. That's what we're talking about tonight, is planning for the longer term and looking at a suite of options, so we're not relying on one sole source.
If the question is it possible, the answer is yes. It's possible. But you wouldn't do that before you have exhausted some of the much less costly opportunities.
Go for a question. This one's to Bruce. Sorry, Bruce. So with regard to the biota water treatment, I'm over here. With regard to the biota water treatment stuff, so what we've heard tonight is that Biota's spending $300 million hopefully on a new abattoir. B, they need lots of water to do that, and it's often in shortfall and sometimes in extreme shortfall. And C, we're building, hopefully going to build a new water treatment plant. So in one sense you can say we're doing, and Biden needs to have this water treatment plant not only for water but also because of their conditions of consent, right? So it seems to me we're doing them a big favour, but in another sense, we've got them over a barrel. So like, are we going to make some money out of it?
I don't know the answer to that. Council wants to make money out of it, they can, but what I've been looking at is the council to recover costs associated with operation and maintenance and renewal. That's all I would be saying the council can reasonably recover from any customer.
Another question here.
Hi. So we've talked about a nice mix of solutions, and that's obviously always, you know, the way that it's going to be. You've talked about some of the rules and water sharing plans that could be changed. I'm wondering if the community's looking at how the drought of record in the water sharing plan is capped. It's capped to 2010, so when water allocations are worked out from the dam, they can't look at anything that's happened since 2010 onwards. So I'm just wondering, does there exist any modelling that anybody's seen or any calculations on how that would extend Tamworth's water supply if the drought of record was updated and had to be kept updated?
That's a good question. Yeah, so I don't know, but in the water sharing plan, when the water sharing plans were introduced, the government made a decision that on the day that they were introduced, that would be the drought record. So in our case, it's 2010. So you're quite right. The drought record in 2019, they're not allowing the water sharing plan to be adjusted to reflect that. Your answer, there's been a lot of modelling done in relation to the new Dungowan Dam and that is all reflected the drought record and the modelling, in my view, the models that they're using now, the government has spent quite a lot of money improving those models to make them more accurate, reflective of what actually happens. So we're on the right sort of path in relation to modelling and to better data and better analysis, and they do use the latest data. The water sharing plan, different issue. We've obviously petitioned the government to change that, but they haven't done it yet.
I'm here, Bruce.
Yeah.
John Drew. I was wondering, you were talking about the Biata situation with better reuse in the industrial and the abattoirs and everything. Didn't really mention any reuse as far as our stormwater, well, not stormwater, but our, effluent and everything like that. Would a better idea be a bigger one and put what we flush down the toilets, for example, into that, or are we going to have two separate ones long term?
Could I get Stuart?
And another quick question another technical question on that one.
Can I get Stuart to answer that first?
Yeah, well, but it's got a lot of, another one to that. What type of reuse system would it be, Stuart? Would it go upriver and come into the water treatment plant, or would it simply go into the reservoirs? How would it work in the Tamworth system?
If you were to do potable reuse.
And I'll also add just a quick comment about the urban idea where Orange had their harvesting off all their streets and everything, because we've probably all driven home in a cloudburst and seen water gushing down it just goes nowhere. But their reuse systems also, for lifestyle and everything, they've got boardwalks and, when people walking around like we do around our bicentennial park, probably just a little bit bigger. But yeah. So anyway, thank you.
Got 3 questions.
Well, in the hypothetical, if you were going to look at potable reuse, so there are advantages in having storage. If you can store the water, it makes it easier to balance the use of the water, the supply and demand of that water. And often there's not necessarily a simple storage that's close to town. So I don't know the geography that well. As far as I know, there are really just those 2 storages, Dungowan and Chaffey. And they're how many kilometres? A long way away. So you'd be pumping 60 kilometres away just to let that water mingle in with the water that's in the dam and then run it back down to reuse it. There have been some decisions in the past where that type of approach, maybe not to that degree, but that type of approach has been seen as a compromise opportunity because it's easier, one, for regulators to get their head around, but it's also easier for the community if there's a sense that the water's going back into a big reservoir, it's going back to nature, being further purified that way. But if you were to look at it in cold, hard engineering terms and not worry about all of those things, then taking it straight back to Kalala water filtration plant would save an awful lot of pumping, and that's the way an engineer would look at it, but the person who says, well, we've got to talk to the community about this, might have a different perspective.
Certainly where the plant's going to go would be lend itself, again, from a technical perspective, lend itself from bringing effluent directly from Westdale into that plant, treating it to a drinking water standard and sending it to, not bringing it back to Kalala, but because it's quite a long way from Westdale to Kalala, putting it into the reticulation, a reservoir somewhere there. So technically that is absolutely possible and it would be the cheapest option. But again, if the community is supportive of that, that'd be great.
Hello, my name's Kate. Could you give us an idea of where Tamworth stands relative to other communities in terms of how much water is used here? I know that there's a big variation between towns in New South Wales. That's partly due to some having industrial use of the town water supply potable use. But I expect that there's a whole lot of other factors in that. So I'm wondering, firstly, where does Tamworth stand at the moment after the work you've done to become more efficient? And for Stuart, what is the best sort of changes in efficiency that you're aware of? How much have other communities been able to bring their water use, their use of fresh river water or their fresh sources of water down by putting effort into it and working out practical ways to do things?
So the Department of Planning and Environment Water Group, they ask us to send in figures every year on lots of things, but one of them is how much water we've used, and we can separate water from commercial and business and residential. I'm going to get this wrong, but you can go on the website and have a look at it, and they rank all of the local government areas that produce water in order. I'm biased, but and you can't look at east of the Great Divide compared to west of the Great Divide because most of our water is used in watering gardens, and they don't have to use as much water on the east side of the Great Divide as we do. We're around 200 to 240 kilolitres a day for a residential customer. There are some councils, Orange is one, that's less than that, but there's heaps that are more than that, and heaps in this area that are more than that. I don't have the graph with me, I can't show you where we are.
Once you start having lots of properties with gardens and lawns to keep alive, then it's hard to get below that. When you look at cities, southeast Queensland for a while in the worst drought, it's got down to about 160, 180 litres per person per day. But that's really with severe water restrictions, no outdoor watering. It's not a comfortable way to live. In terms of how much can you improve through water efficiency, Sydney's actually a pretty interesting story there because Sydney went into the millennium drought, and I think on probably more than 300 litres per person per day, and there were lots of water saving initiatives that were put in place at that time, and that's when we started to see dual flush toilets going in, low flow shower heads going in, and water efficient white goods going in. And Sydney Water fully expected that once the water restrictions that were applied during the millennium drought, once those water restrictions were removed, that we'd bounce back to where we were. But of course we didn't, because people didn't pull out their dual flush toilets and low flow shower heads. That infrastructure remains. So we actually only very quite recently got back to about the point that we were at 20 years ago, even though we've had, I don't know, another million people or so in the city basin. So we had this really good step change of being much more water efficient over that last 20 years. But to a degree, that step change has been taken now, and you can't, you're not going to add another dual flush toilet, you get another benefit out of it. So there's a big improvement that can usually be made where you've made none, but once you've started on that journey, the opportunities become fewer and fewer.
Another question over here.
Margaret, I just want to know, you're saying that the water plan is like written in Sydney, they've got like the government planning and we give us so much water, it was signed in 2010. Is that a bit like the Ten Commandments written in stone? Can't we as people change it? Why do we have to accept their decision?
That's it.
Well, I don't know.
No, and obviously we don't have to. The government makes the rules, and we need to try and get the government to change the rules. That's what the council's been trying to do. We haven't had any success. You can bring your local member and talk to him.
Why would we sign up for putting another
we
whatever
weren't-
feed
we're
on
not-
top of that going down and things like that if they've got control of all the water?
So we're not given the option to opt out. We're not given that
State
option.
government issue that we need to put on the table so we can start addressing how the water sharing plans rules are made.
Let's start yesterday.
It's a state government water management issue that we've identified that needs to be addressed. But tonight we're talking about a whole lot of other issues as well. So we'll leave that one go. We know it needs to be addressed. We want another issue.
Just a quick question, Ian.
Yeah, I'm a former South Australian. I grew up with the Morgan Whaler pipeline, 400 kilometres, delivering us currently 66 gigalitres per annum. I just wonder, in what we're talking about here tonight, and we're specific, we've got Armadale, we've got Tubbo, we've got a whole range of things here, different places, horses for courses. I do really wonder whether we're perhaps not looking at the total big picture and where we could be. And many, many years ago, back to 1940, South Australia made this decision. And I really think now that some of those decisions are paying off 70 years down the track.
I suppose that's what the stewardship
No, I wouldn't dismiss the idea of some sort of regional water sharing completely. I'll put it up there to have that discussion. But remember, when Templeworth is in severe drought is when you need those solutions. Dubbo is also in severe drought. Armadale is also in severe drought. So you're kind of trying to tap into water supply that's not necessarily there when you want it.
Talking about the bigger picture of desalination plants over on the seaboard.
Oh, okay.
We've talked about
Just another one question here, and then the last one from you, Steve.
Thanks very much, Bruce and Stuart, for your information tonight, and especially your Stuart on resilience. I think that was very interesting and things to think about. It seems to me that we've got a secure water supply, virtually secure water supply. We could call it that in Chaffey Dam. And there's one question tonight which Bruce didn't answer, that is the management of it, state water. It's interesting to hear your comments that you thought they had managed it pretty well, but I don't think the community really understands how well, if they do manage well, state water manages the water. And I think that probably needs a bit of description to the community, because everyone was concerned during the drought where the water went to and while we were short. So if we think, we talked about complexity where the water is in Chaffey Dam for us. We've got these sleeper licences. If they're not used, you lose them. I mean, obviously you don't lose them. But are they for sale? Can you purchase them? Or after 10 years, 15 years, they're not used, they can be cancelled. There's not a market for them. There isn't a market. I mean, if I mean, in today's age, I mean, we've got mineral leases and everything else. If you're not using it, the government says, well, you lose that right to that mineral, that gas field, or whatever it is, because you have to utilise it.
So there is
what is it about
there's
water?
there's no forfeiting, if you haven't used it for 30 years, doesn't matter. You can sell it, if you're a willing seller and you've got a purchaser who's prepared to pay what you want for it, you can sell it. But obviously, there are not many people selling it because they're sitting on them. I don't know why, but no, they don't forfeit them if they don't use water over a long period of time.
That's a aspect of government, which again we can't talk about.
So you can't?
Last question now, because
No, it's different. Yeah. It's pain, yeah. I regret not buying a new one with 11, but
Stuart, this basically comes to Bruce. Bruce, with the developments that you're discussing, and it does look like we're going to be looking at recycling water, is it time for council, because there's councillors here, to have a sensible discussion about using recycling water?
Look, I don't know if I want to answer that. What I will say is, I think that the state needs to have, and indeed the nation needs to have a discussion. I don't think it's much sense Tamworth Regional Council talking about a particular issue for Tamworth when that same issue is equally applicable to everyone that lives in New South Wales. And so it doesn't make sense, in my view, for the council to spend its money communicating with its residents about an issue that is equally applicable to virtually 100% of the rest of the state. Therefore, I think it's the state government's responsibility to start that communication, pay for the communication, do it statewide, so that you don't have every council, local government authority in the state spending ratepayers' money trying to convince them of the same thing that they were talking about next door, and I just don't see the sense in that.
Yeah.
We'll just leave it with, I'll ask Stuart to finish on that because that's where his expertise lies. He's been on the infrastructure panels advising government about this idea of actually we need to make some community change.
I think that's a perfectly fair call for all the reasons that Bruce just described. It would be good though to actually have state governments hearing that message from local governments, and I don't know that they broadly are. I know they are from one or two, Rouse, for example. But it would be good if local governments were prepared to go to the state governments, at least can we make this a conversation so that we can get this moved. It's something that I've actually spoken to the Commonwealth government about. They're currently talking about reviving the National Water Commission to oversee an updated National Water Initiative. They've previously requested advice, suggestions on what might be included in updating the National Water Initiative, and I think that that's really an area where the Commonwealth Government should be getting involved and facilitating those kinds of discussions. That's just one example about recycled water. I think there are many discussions that are exactly the same.
Can I just make one more comment about that? I'm going to a workshop tomorrow run by the state about barriers to recycled water. What does local government see as barriers? This is the second one, and that's the type of information that we're passing on to them, that you need to start communicating and educating, and that's one of the main barriers in the state to do that. Now, how quickly the state responds to that, but at least they're asking the right questions.
Can I just make one comment? With all the questions that are being asked and the issues around water sharing plans and water recycling, your local member is the New South Wales Minister. Just like to remind you.
Yeah.
With that,
There's his email address.
we'll just take a moment to have a reflection. We've had a chance tonight to talk about water security for Tamworth. We've heard a lot of fantastic ideas and we've got a momentum here to actually try and think about changes that can happen here in town. We've got a slide at the end and Alice will take you through that saying, be a voice.
If you were interested in these, being a voice and in these further actions, this slide is actually printed out. There are a couple on each table. If your table has already claimed yours, there are also some at the back as well, and you can grab that to take that information with you. There's also a QR code on the tables. If you scan that with your phone, it'll take you straight to our Facebook group. We would love you to be involved and stay up to date with what is happening. And of course, as Bev has pointed out, Kevin Anderson is the water minister, so if you have found a passion, if you have continued a passion tonight, please do contact him. Thank you very much to both of our speakers for coming today. We do have a gift for both of them. Thank you very much, Lynn.
This is Mary Moffalo. It's a very drought tolerant plant. Thank you very much.
Come back into here with meals or a drink and continue the discussion, but that does conclude the formal part. Thank you.
And if anyone wants to take flowers, they can.
Oh yes, please take the flowers.
Yeah.
I'm going to leave all that laptop up to you.
I thought for a minute they were chilies, but they're flowers. What do you think, Dave? Morning, old people talk, or? Yeah, it's a pity that a lot more young people are concerned, but at the same time it's understandable. They haven't got that sort of problem yet. Yeah, it's not going. Oh, it is going.